Welcome, everyone. We'll get started soon. We're so glad you're here today. Welcome, everyone. Started in about a minute. Grab some water and get comfortable because you're in for a treat today. I think we can get started. All right, thank you so much. So hello and welcome to our Grantmakers in the Arts 2023 conference, GIA Multiverse Revisiting Pasts to Build the Future Summer Series. We are so thrilled that you all have been able to join us. As I said, you are in for a treat today. I'm Sherilyn Seeley. I'm the Senior Program Manager for Grantmakers in the Arts. I am Black. I'm a Black woman with chocolate skin. I've got glasses on, red lips, white nails, a tan top, and a really incredible background. Incredible because it is Puerto Rico, and we'll be going there in less than a month. So exciting stuff. And today's session is called Funding for the Culture, a Just Transition Investing Approach to Supporting Our Movements. And in a few moments, we'll have our organizer, Abdiel López, sharing. But before then, just want to get some housekeeping things out of the way. So if you haven't done so already, take a moment to review some of our guidelines. I'm going to drop them in the chat right now so that you can take a look. There you go. And you can conference with us. Right? All of our sessions will be recorded, so that's great news. If you have any technical issues, you can reach out to Tech Jess or Tech Noga, and they will help you with all of your tech needs. Otherwise, if you have questions for our presenters, you can look to the bottom of your screen for the Q&A icon. Click that and submit your questions, and they'll be all ready and queued up for the Q&A section of today. If you would like your experience to include live captioning, you can click the CC feature at the bottom of your screen as well, and select Show Subtitles. And that way you'll be able to get all of your captioning dreams realized on our summer series session today. And so without further ado, I want to pass the mic over to Abdiel to get us started.
Awesome. Thank you so much. My name is Abdiel López. I am the Director of Capital Activation at Justice Funders, joined by an amazing panel of speakers. I will hand over the microphone to each one of them to share their names, their affiliation, and where they're calling in from. I'm calling in from Tongva land and Chumash land, aka Los Angeles, but our offices are headquartered on the traditional lands of the Lissiana Ohlone people up in the Bay Area. So with that, I will pass the microphone to Lora to introduce herself.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lora Smith, and I am the Director of Investment Partnerships for Justice Funders located on the unceded territory of the Shawnee, Cherokee, and Osage in Kentucky, and we'll pass to Vanessa.
Hi, everybody. Vanessa Roanhorse. I am the Navajo from the Navajo Nation, grew up on the nation. I live currently here on Tiwa lands in Albuquerque, New Mexico with my partner and 9-year-old. Today I'm with Roanhorse Consulting, CEO, and just really happy to be here. And I'll send it on over to Annie.
Great, thanks all. Annie McShiras here. I'm with the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative in Oakland, California on unceded Ohlone territory. And really looking forward to talking with you all today and excited to also hear the other panelists speak. So it should be a good time.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you again for joining us today. Over the next 75 minutes or so, you will hear us speak about the collective work that we're doing to activate a just transition in philanthropy. To do that, though, it is important to understand who Justice Funders is and why and how we're bringing so many of our movement partners like Vanessa and Annie together in conversation with funders and investors. And actually, this is the first time that Justice Funders explicitly connects with the grant makers in the arts audience, but we are inspired by our collective work to support the burgeoning solidarity economy movement and are in conversation and actively working with some of your members. So while we at Justice Funders, we hold ourselves accountable to the Just Transition movement, many of the people and organizations highlighted in the Solidarity Not Charity report commissioned by GIA are also stewards and collaborators of our work, some of whom, like I said right now, are here with us today on this panel. And the work that we'll share today really moves alongside some of the findings in the Solidarity Not Charity report, which we'll drop a link in the chat right now, which presents, as you all probably already know, actionable recommendations that grant makers and funders can activate to create systems change, specifically in the arts and culture field. And actually specifically through our work with our funders that we call the Just Transition Investment Community, we look at some of the recommendations that report might characterize as, quote, investment and endowment shifts and governance shifts. So before diving into these strategies and recommendations, I do want to take a step back to share that most of the work that we do at Justice Funders is in service to the funders who look to our movement partners to collectivize and activate strategies to usher a just transition in philanthropy. The strategy of convening funders to support frontline communities can actually be traced all the way back to our founding, in 2009, when a group of Bay Area program officers got together to discuss how to leverage their resources to support their communities in response to the murder of Oscar Grant by the BART police. Then this group actually became the steering committee of what we now call the Bay Area Justice Funders Network and preceded the now called Justice Funders organization that you know today. And we currently house still the Bay Area Justice Funders Network. 5 years ago in 2018, our name change reflects this national scope of work that we started ushering with our funders and our movement partners instead of just focusing on the Bay Area. So that was a little context to demonstrate how conversations can actually lead to actionable items and activate a just transition within philanthropy. And so that year that we changed our name to Justice Funders was also the year that we released the first edition of Resonance. Resonance is a framework that guides and supports philanthropy to move away from extractive practices, as you may see on the screen here, toward more transformative ones to activate our vision of redistributing wealth, democratizing power, and shifting economic control to communities. And on the screen here, you will see that this spectrum is actually part of a larger one in the Resonance framework that contains examples of practices that range, again, from extractive to regenerative, to help you imagine what shifts you can make in your own institution towards a just transition. And following this release of resonance in 2022, after the racial uprisings across the country, many of the funders in our network actually came to us for guidance on how to better align their investments with their social justice values and mission. So there was enough momentum and enough conversation at the time to create what we now called the integrated capital team at Justice Funders, which I joined earlier this year along with my colleague Lora Smith on this call. As we kept having conversations with our funders, our team also engaged in conversations with many movement partners in the just transition, and we collectively found a need to codify best practices for investors to divest from the global stock market and into community-controlled just transition efforts. This is important because one of our movement partners, Climate Justice Alliance, reports that in 2020, US philanthropy invested 13 times more in the global stock market than in their grant-making portfolio. So our work together aims to divest, like I said before, from the extractive economy and invest in community-controlled projects that support the self-determination of frontline communities. This codification of best practices later became known as the Just Transition Investment Framework, which we released earlier this year to help institutions create transformative practices that centered on the just transition movement. But I'm going to pause here and actually go back to a slide that I just skipped, because this is the Just Transition Investment Community that we launched in 2022, which I mentioned before was the community, the ongoing community of practice of funders that were engaged in conversations to activate their investments and really the rest of their endowment, or the other 95%, to better align with their values and their mission. So we launched this in 2022, and as you can see on this slide, these are some of the funders in this community this year, some of whom you might recognize, and we hope to continue to grow in the upcoming years. So again, in sharing all of this background context, I hope to have shown you how, again, conversations with values-aligned thought partners and being in right relationships with these thought partners can turn into actions and communities of practice to inspire and push those actions forwards. For example, at these meetings with the JTIC, we focus on specific themes like rewriting your investment policy statement, or looking at perpetuity and examining what that means for your own institutions. And these are oftentimes topics and themes that the funders specifically face while on their just transition journey. So we really tried to cross-pollinate and help each other activate collectively and shift the needle in the field. And to do that, we actually foreground the work that we did with our movement partners for the Just Transition Investment Framework. So the framework itself is divided into 4 major quadrants that you see on the slide. And it outlines actions that foundations can implement right now, and actually also highlights some common pitfalls and false solutions that foundations should also be aware of as they start their journey toward a just transition. So in the interest of time, we can go over some of the quadrants, or the 4 quadrants here. Just a brief summary of what each quadrant looks like, and in the Q&A portion, I'm happy to talk more about specific actionable items we recommend. So for example, in the first quadrant, and by the way, this framework is not meant to be prescriptive. It's meant to be cyclical, iterative, experimental in nature, because we know that nothing in this work is linear, it's all emergent. And to honor that, we really try to promote the cyclical nature of all this work. So this first one is shifting capital, the what question. So this investing in a just transition means redirecting capital away from the extractive economy and toward local regenerative solidarity economies that build economic power and self-determination in BIPOC communities on the front lines of social, economic, and racial injustice. So this quadrant really calls out where the money goes and what is the money. What are we talking about when we talk about capital? This next one, shifting capital, how it operationalizes the values and principles of just transition that require investors to change their expectations, and we'll talk about changing expectations with my colleagues in a bit, in order to build a different future in which everyone lives well without the sacrifice of others. The starting point is to center community needs and support their self-determination rather than the financial gains that we traditionally adhere to for the investor. and being as non-extractive as possible, both in the process of engaging with communities as well as in setting the terms of the investments. Then we go to shifting power. What does that mean? Shifting economic control to communities is a core component of a just transition. For a philanthropic institution, this means transferring decision-making power over how resources are allocated to the frontline BIPOC communities from whom wealth and power have been extracted for centuries. And finally, on this next slide is shifting power, the how. So embracing the vision and values of just transition to redistribute wealth and power requires a fundamental shift in the culture and paradigms within institutional philanthropy that have shaped practices around how philanthropic assets are managed. So while this all may seem new or perhaps even abstract right now, we also actually facilitate a 100% community-controlled loan fund that is governed by 5 movement partners, 2 of whom are here today, which my colleague Lora and the rest of the panelists, Vanessa and Annie, will also share more about in 1 second. Because so many frontline communities are experimenting with new economic models to become self-determining, this work is really important because we can't rely just on grant making to make this shift long-term and sustainable. Our call to action is that we must activate and tap our endowments and shift the way our practices look so that we can democratize capital and power. And it's really relevant to this audience because many of these frontline communities are also artists, are culture bearers, are cultural anchors, and are the ones that are actually experimenting and are at the helm of these new economic models, and also are looking for these investments to become self-determining. So I'm excited with that context in mind to pass the microphone on to the rest of my panelists, including Lora Smith, who will share just how we're doing that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Abdiel. It's wonderful to be here with all of y'all today, and I hope I get to see some of you in Puerto Rico next month as well. So we created the Just Transition Integrated Capital Fund to operationalize and put into practice the principles presented in the Just Transition Investment Framework. As the JTI one moment, moving my slide. Thank you. As the JTI framework was being developed, Justice Funders were beginning to share its core principles with our JTIC members. And in those conversations, members identified a series of challenges and barriers they had to make these types of non-extractive investments and give up control and power, like what is outlined in the JTI framework. And some of those included things like working with traditional investment advisors who were unwilling or uncomfortable with making just transition investments, a lack of internal staffing, capacity, or expertise, and even foundations with dedicated internal investment staffing capacity needed support with deal flow, deal coordination, and shared due diligence for JT Just Transition aligned investments. So together, JTIC members began dreaming up a collective solution for building new infrastructure that could facilitate collective action. And they landed on a pooled fund to which JTIC members and foundation investors from outside of our JTIC community could make investments into, with movement leaders serving in decision-making roles. This dream became what is now the Just Transition Integrated Capital Fund, which is soon to be $20 million close-ended integrated capital fund. The JTIC fund is governed by 5 movement partners, 4 of whom also co-authored the JTI investment framework, and 2 of whom are with us today. Those include East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, EB-PREC, Equitable Food Oriented Development, EFOD Fund, Matriarch Funds, which are a collaboration between Native Women Lead and Roanhorse Consulting, Right to the City, and Climate Justice Alliance. This is our beautiful governing body here that you can see. These partners were chosen because they have all launched their own community-controlled investment funds that support the just transition. So they bring a high level of expertise in investment, and they also are accountable to movements and BIPOC and working class communities across the United States. While Justice Funders facilitates the fund, we have no vote and hold no decision-making power. It's the governing body that makes all decisions and have created all of our policies. We just launched our investment policy statement, IPS, last Tuesday, and it's are currently accepting investments. That link is now in the chat. Thank you, and I encourage you to check it out. A couple of important aspects of the fund that I want to highlight for y'all, especially as to how this makes us different. So the JTIC fund is a new model for philanthropy, offering foundations a learning vehicle to move endowed assets. We're not talking about just grants. We're not talking about just program-related investments. We are talking about that 95% in your endowment to BIPOC and working class controlled funds and grassroots projects through non-extractive financing in the form of 0% loans and accompanying catalytic grants. The JTIC fund prioritizes repair work between philanthropy and BIPOC communities and is rooted in the values and lived experiences of our movement partners. 4 core values help guide our terms for both accepting and deploying capital and inform all of our strategies for investing into community-led funds and projects. And those 4 values are local community control, non-extractive finance and right relationships, rematriation, and reparations. And we define those in our IPS when you download and read it. We are offering 0% 5, 7, and 10-year notes, along with integrated capital grants to support things like technical assistance for our borrowers. The types of things we will be investing in starting in the 4th quarter of this year include community land ownership, real estate assets and affordable housing, food systems and health equity, indigenous movements and land back initiatives, worker self-directed initiatives, and climate resiliency. And we're flipping the script on how we talk about risk and also on traditional notions of return and reporting. Our IPS outlines how we are redefining risk by acknowledging that with traditional investing, all financial, social, ecological, and political risk is absorbed by BIPOC and working class communities. With our IPS, we are asking that the wealth holders take on all financial risk for all investments. And because it's the philanthropic field that the JTIC fund most intends to influence and transform, we ask that foundations invested in our fund provide us with reporting measures on how participation in this demonstration project changes their internal practices and what external outcomes those changes produced. Reporting will be captured throughout through qualitative interviews conducted by Justice Funders staff quarterly with funders and at the end of the JTIC fund's life cycle. We also want to challenge philanthropy around notions of perpetuity, legacy, and wealth accumulation. And therefore, as I've stated, this is a closed-ended fund, which means that all capital will be deployed in 10 to 15 years. I mentioned we just released our IPS. There's a link in the chat to download that, and we invite you to look at our IPS and use it as an open source learning tool to consider and to use it to consider your foundation's own investment policy statements and how you're thinking about those 95% in endowed funds. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Vanessa, one of our amazing governing body members, to talk about her work and help illustrate what this type of investing looks like in practice. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lora and Abdiel and the whole team at Justice Funders. Getting the invitation to participate in the beginning was like, this sounds great. I'm in awe of all these other organizations. I have no idea what we're about to make. So, you know, a year and a half, nearly 2 years later, like here we are, and the work continues to be inspiring. So I am Vanessa Roanhorse. I've been a co-founder of Native Women Lead since we were founded in 2017, which was when 8 Indigenous women came together and looked across the landscape, and we saw no national organization specifically focused on Indigenous women founders and really the economics of what Indigenous women bring to the table. So in 2017, we launched Native Women Lead, and it really was a grassroots, community-led volunteer group of us that built something based upon our lived experience. We identified pretty quickly from listening to our community and network that what folks needed was a community of people convening each other. They needed capital, and ultimately we needed to change the narrative of what it means to be an Indigenous woman in our own power, in the economy, and as founders. And so what is up here today is really this larger ecosystem, this vision of what we've come together to understand. At the center, as you can see, is an Indigenous woman with beautiful long hair with a Native Women Lead logo. But the dream of this really came when we acknowledged that Not only do we need community and convening, we need to change the story and be in charge of our own narrative. The capital piece was the one part of this conversation that continued to be missing. Not just because of the lack of lending institutions that understand the lived experience of Indigenous Native people in the United States, but also because when you really just look at the journey of where the money sits, is you have the traditional banks with their underwriting and their risk policies and how they structure investments, and then you have venture capital. And if you're coming from places where I come from, one, we know generational wealth isn't there. We know that's primarily founded due to stolen land and genocide and the continued practice to assimilate and get rid of the Native people. And we also know this idea of generational wealth and capital itself comes from a very linear Western worldview of what wealth is. And so from the very beginning, we understood that we can't create a cared for ecosystem if we don't have access and leadership and ownership over capital. And so in 2020, we applied to become an Equality Can't Wait awardee. I'm proud to say in 2021, we were one of the top 3 grantees or awardees that received $10 million to really create and develop this ecosystem. So as you can see, this entire image here is what it is we hope for the future. So we are building a long-term movement and ecosystem that requires deep partnership and relationship with our funders and how we move the money. What you can see is every piece of our ecosystem isn't just connected, but we have bigger and broader impacts that we're hoping to serve. One is stronger Native women businesses and founders. We actually don't talk about them as our pipeline, we call them our waterway. Because from our perspective, a waterway is more generative, caring, and supportive. A waterway is also unstoppable. It creates canyons, creates new tributaries, and continues to be part of the broader impacts of the earth. If we're successful, we will have economic advancement and empowerment, which should lead to agency, healing, and safety. Because we know Indigenous women face some of the greatest crime, greatest violence against ourselves, our two-spirit, queer, and trans relatives. If we continue to build this, we will rematriate and have sovereignty as people of not only this land, but over ourselves and our bodies. Each one of these activities has to be part of the broader investment. And so part of why this JTIC process was so critical for us is, yes, capital access is so critical and important, but what you do with that capital means that it also has to feed and support the rest of the story. And as part of this, we also have to be in charge, ultimately, of creating our own underwriting and our own infrastructure. And so if you could go to the next slide to share a little bit more. What we grounded this work in is something that Native Women Lead and Roanhorse Consulting co-created back in 2020 at the height of the pandemic, which is that we knew fundamentally that the 5 C's of credit as a foundational tool to assess risk and have criteria for who gets access to this capital had to be completely changed. So we came up with our 5 R's of rematriation. And each one of these R's actually has an entire criteria and due diligence process that we've actually developed to assess any potential investment. We brought this thinking and this idea to the JTIC, and we said rematriation isn't just about creating a new relationship with the earth. It's also about bringing women into decision-making about how women interact with resources in their community. And so for us, it's revolutionary, regenerative, restorative, rooted, and relational. Next slide. So we began using this for our matriarch funds. To date, we began in microfinance. We all know what microfinance is, but we used our relationship-based lending and our 5 R's of rematriation to move that money. We started at 2,000 and now we're up to 50,000, and we have a scaffolded lending program. So what that means is we have multiple funds going, because as you know, we have to demonstrate the receipts every time to showcase and demonstrate that our women are not a risky investment, but also that we have the waterway of incredible talent. So we are at a 99 repayment rate. Our first fund has already been completely paid off. Our second fund is about to be paid off. And at this point, we have 145 applicants in our waterway. Next slide. The big vision that we're leading towards, with which this fund is going to support in our relationships, is the Matriarch Revolutionary Fund, which will be the first ever integrated capital fund designed by Indigenous women for Indigenous women in the United States. And the goal is for us to not only just empower Indigenous women leaders to grow, but ultimately we want to demonstrate that Native women and our founders are investable using our 5 R's of rematriation, and that ultimately we really need to re-examine how we demonstrate risk. So we hope to launch it by the end of this year, if not early next year. This will be our $10 million fund, and this will be offering loans $50,000 to $250,000 at 3 to 5% interest rates. And all of this, for every entrepreneur, if you can remember that water cycle I showed, once they're part of our network, they get access to every piece of our ecosystem. And this is brought to you through a collective vision. Next slide, please. Which is the future is Indigenous women. And this is a partnership with Native Women Lead, my firm Roanhorse Consulting, and New Mexico Community Capital. And what we believe is through this work, the centering of Indigenous women as the caretakers and leaders of economic systems that support their family, communities, and tribes. It is the rebalancing of the feminine energy back into our decision circles. And this is our approach to rebuilding and reimagining systems through a matriarchal lens. And what I will say about all of this is that we would not have been able to do this if we weren't able to continue to build these networks and partnerships with the GTIC. One of the things that's really important in what we created for the Just Transition initiative here and within our IPS statement is the concept of right relationship. And the concept of the right relationship is really about having that with capital, and the funders has and always has to be at the center. And as an Indigenous person, we always like to say in a good way. And when we talk about that, what we're actually trying to say is that in order for us to do this in a good way means we're coming with transparency, truth, and the right intentions. And if we're able to build collectively together, then we can actually have what is right relationships so that we understand what is the greater purpose. So by co-creating this report and naming that rematriation is part of, rematriation is actually part of the work that we have to do towards reparations, that it was liberating because we were able to share common language, values, and purpose. And that this work that we get to do, along with all of these incredible partners, is really our collective offering and gift. The final thing I'd share is that the process of developing the IPS was one of the most powerful engagements that I've had to date. Being able to be seen and heard in this way, and being able to articulate it in a document that has historically been such a painful and often weaponized process was liberating. So I'm happy to say that we have entered into a good relationship with this network and the partners and funders that we have. And it is in a good way that I'm excited to actually end with this definition of rematriation and invite my colleague Annie to share about their journey and work.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Vanessa. That was really wonderful to hear. And I agree. It's been a really amazing journey together to be a part of this JTIC group. My name is Annie McShiras, and I am the Investment and Fundraising Director for the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative. We are a multi-stakeholder cooperative. We organize with tenants and community groups and residents of the East Bay of California. So that's Oakland and the greater area east of San Francisco, to purchase property, real estate, housing, land, and take it off of the speculative market, move it into the hands of community control for permanent affordability. And that's been our mission since we started in 2018. And we are still very much a startup. We're now 5 years old, and that's a really exciting milestone. And we're seeing that this new model that we've created for participatory real estate acquisition and stewardship is picking up steam. We now have liberated, which is what we call a purchase of 5 properties for community control. We're just about to close on our 6th property, which is a 10-unit residential in Deep East Oakland, which has housed for decades majority Black residents who have been, basically moved from landlord to landlord and speculative predatory investor landlord to extractive landlord. And so the property itself has a lot of repairs and maintenance and management to work on. But the reason I bring up this example is because that is the heart of our mission. That is the heart of our work. The heart of our work is to work with tenants who are in situations that are untenable and move the conversation and move the real estate and the housing into both community control, community stewardship, and right relationship, right? We believe housing is a human right. We believe housing is something that we all deserve to be taken care of. And the properties that we've brought into our portfolio are all occupied by long-term residents of the East Bay who've gotten, essentially really who've been harmed and who have the potential to be displaced as a result of our extremely extractive, predatory real estate and financial systems. So we're really excited about all the growth that we've had. I want to focus today's conversation on our non-extractive financing model and the reason why we can move at the pace of community and trust in such a fast-moving, fast-paced, extractive and predatory real estate market, such as the Bay Area. It's one of the most expensive real estate markets in the country. The way that we've been able to work around this system and not need to take on high-cost financing is because of our model of non-extractive financing. So we saw at the very beginning that it was a challenge to be able to finance multi-million-dollar properties in our current real estate landscape. We reached out to banks, we reached out to CDFIs, admission-aligned financial institutions, and in the beginning, right, we received the same response of, "You're not ready, come back to us when you have properties under your belt, come back to us when you're ready." And essentially, we all know what that means is we're not going to fund a startup, we're not going to fund a cooperative, especially one that doesn't have a kind of track record that we're looking for. And we are a majority BIPOC-led organization, and there has been, I'm sure you all are aware of a deep and long history of racialized displacement, discrimination, redlining, and abuse of these populations on behalf of the real estate and financial systems. So historically, our leadership has been shut out of finance, and it's been harmed by finance. And so we decided to write our own application to receive what's called a direct public offering qualification, which basically means that we could sell shares to the general public, our community members, folks here in the East Bay and the wider area who believe in the work that we're doing to take real estate and housing off of the speculative market and give it back into the hands of community control and community ownership. And who have $1,000 that they have in savings that they would otherwise, keep in a CD or savings account, be able to move some of those funds into our model. And so we launched our direct public offering to be able to offer shares to non-accredited investors in 2020. And since then, we've raised nearly $5 million in our fund through this unique crowdfunding approach. So I bring this up in the context of our conversation about the JTAC fund to say, we created our own terms, and we had that experience in 2020 of creating the terms that worked best for us and worked best for this model of a different relationship with land and housing that brought the cost down in such a significant way that we could actually both afford, as a startup cooperative organization, we could both afford the expensive cost of housing because we could bring our financing down. And then we could offer, through this lower cost of capital, we could offer more affordable rates of rent for our resident owners. And so by seeding each project with community capital, we've been able to keep community in the driver's seat, use the capital that we've been able to bring in through this crowdfunding approach to leverage other kinds of financing. And so what I mean by this is that because we've secured these non-extractive resources, and you can see the terms here in this slide, 1,000 per share, and people can purchase more than one share. We offer a very modest 1.5% target return and a 5-year minimum term. And so all of those terms are terms that work best for what we're trying to do and the way that we want to lower the cost of capital and lower the cost of rent for our residents to be able to purchase housing more affordably. And as a result, we've actually been able to leverage the funds that have been raised through this direct public offering to bring in institutional partners to support us as well. And so, this is a focus on where can philanthropy play a role, and how can the larger foundation world play a role in supporting the kind of work that we've been trying to do. So when we were able to actually name the terms that worked best for us and put it out into the world, and you can see on the slide as well, you can read our offering documents to get a deep dive into what those terms and what the offering look like. We then were able to leverage additional support from the philanthropic space to be in right relationship with us and to understand what we meant when we said, these are the terms that work best for us. This is what our community needs. And so I'm just going to give an example of our purchase of Esther's Orbit Room, which is a historic landmark property supporting Black arts and culture revitalization on the 7th Street corridor in West Oakland. Historically, it's been known as Harlem of the West. In the 50s through the 70s, it was really a hub for Black economic sovereignty and culture and arts, with jazz and blues being sort of at the center of that. And Esther Marbury creating Esther's Orbit Room and running it for decades, a Black woman philanthropist and business owner. And people want to see it come back. People want to see a revitalization of the entire corridor. And we're starting with Esther's to do that. And in 2021, we launched a capital campaign to be able to purchase Esther's and also raise the funds to be able to revitalize it and restore it, which is really a lot of construction costs and design and a complete reconstruction of the building itself, which has fallen into disrepair. And that's what we're seeing with a lot of these properties that are in areas that our members are based, is the disrepair and the lack of care and stewardship that our people deserve and that our communities deserve. And so a lot of our work is raising funds to be able to support that reconstruction and revitalization. And so one of our earliest funders in support of the Esther's Orbit Room project was Katali Foundation. And we found that in our initial relationship with Katali, initial conversations really moved the conversation, moved the needle around supporting Esther's Orbit Room and to support the West Oakland 7th Street corridor revitalization. They were really aligned at the very beginning and wanted to find a way to make this work. And as a result, they came in as a champion. They came in as a funder that was really listening to the needs of E.B. Prack, of our founder, Noni Session, and the vision that our community members in West Oakland have for what we want to see happen with Esther's Orbit Room. And so as a result of that connection and relationship built on trust and built on mutual understanding and connection, then we were able to leverage additional financing from Katali support. And so I wanted to just highlight a few key areas that our support from Katali really brought to the fore for us in terms of understanding what is right relationship and non-extractive relationship with funders actually look like, and how does it play out? Because one of the big takeaways in the creation of this framework that Abdiel and Lora brought forward earlier in the conversation is not just about like the what of capital, right? Not just that we need to move more capital into community control, but how it's done as well is extremely important and is a part of this non-extractive relationship. And so Katali showed up with us seeking understanding, first of all. They really came into the conversation around how do we support esters with a mindset of teamwork and a mindset of community building. They didn't come in with any kind of paternalistic top-down, we know best. They came in with a shared understanding of we want to be in this with you. We are your peer, and we want to work together to make this project work. The next piece of the connection with Katali that was really stood out to us was an easeful trust-based negotiations process. And so initially, our esters project didn't pencil out. There were a lot of expenses. We weren't actually able to make it sort of work out in a financial way in terms of the funding that we had to bring in and the cost of revitalizing it. So Katali worked with us to bring the project to pencil. They brought some technical assistance and capacity building to our finance team to work with us to make the project pencil out. And we worked with them to get our performance and business model for esters to a place that was ready for both for their funding and for other funders. Finally, we were able to negotiate to our terms to get to a place that worked for both of us. And so we ended up actually receiving a 0% 10-year loan from Katali to be able to purchase the property, the acquisition cost of purchasing esters. And that was game-changing, that we could bring in such non-extractive terms and financing into our portfolio. There were a lot of technical workarounds because the IRS actually doesn't allow, it has rules around loans that are made at below market. And so we worked with them on expenditure responsibility. We worked with them on finding ways that we could bring a 0% loan in and stay in compliance with the IRS regulations. And happy to talk offline about some of those technical pieces that we worked through. But the systems at play actually are not supportive of the kind of models that we're working to create. And Katali worked with us to find solutions. And then finally, the terms themselves, like I mentioned, were radically non-extractive. We had exemplary due diligence documents, definitions of returns, incorporated social impact. There was a transparent process for redistribution, and ultimately leadership of Katali Foundation worked really closely with our team to make sure that these terms could work for them. And so I think that was another learning that we saw when leadership plays a role in the process of creating these non-extractive terms and relationships with grantees. It goes a long way. And so just to segue into our work together with the JTIC Fund, we took this experience, and I'm taking this experience and letting it inform how we are moving forward with creating our visionary IPS document that Lora and Abdiel talked about, and creating as well our terms and loan agreements with funders that we want to bring into this fund. We want to build this demonstration fund in a way where Katali is not just a one-off funder who decides to do this and no one else follows suit. We want to see other funders follow suit, and we want to see a movement shift, a field shift. And we know it's possible. And so we actually together with our 5 governing body members, including Vanessa and a number of others, we wrote our own terms. We wrote our own IPS document. We're finalizing our term sheets and our loan agreements to really center the needs of community. And the learnings that I've brought forward in terms of how we've done that with the East Bay Permanent Real Estate Cooperative, and how we've seen that it's possible, and that there can be a different way both to move money and to relate to each other in the process of doing so. That's not extractive, that's trust-based, that's empowering. And so it's been a really empowering experience to set the terms for ourselves and to really try to right wrongs that we've seen over and over again in the financial system, and the way that it has extracted, particularly from Black, Indigenous, and poor communities, be able to right those wrongs by starting from the place that we're all at, that the community members are at, and finding solutions with the philanthropic sector to start to move money in a different way, and to rebuild our relationship to each other, to the land, and to finance. Again, the key point here is how do we move away from these non-extractive transactional relationships into right relationship with each other. And so I'll pause there, because I think I'm at the end of time, but I'm really excited to share more with questions that anyone has, and also just share more in depth about what our experience has been like building this demonstration fund with the support of our 5 governing body stewards. So thank you so much for being here and listening, and being a part of this work with us.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Vanessa. And thank you, Lora, for those great remarks. I have a couple of questions before we open it up to the audience. So the first question, and this is for anyone here on this panel, is what does it mean for funders to take on risk? How are you defining that with your work in your communities, and also through the loan fund? Whoever feels compelled can just go off mic. It's a pretty loaded question, but feel free to just take it away.
Well, I think part of what we have been doing around our funding is particularly around the risk, is that we have asked our funders to commit to 0 to 1% investments in what we're building. And that as a way to do that is it allows us to create the conditions, whether it's loan forgiveness or regranting, to help the borrowers and the people we're investing in to be able to have a meaningful, cared way to pay it back, is one of the things that we often ask. The other is that we really ask the question, which is like, how does the investment side and the grant making side talk? And how do we have those collective conversations with both of the CIO and the person who is helping us with the granting? Because part of that is being able to articulate the level of risk that our community is receiving. I talked about the loss of generational wealth, or the lack of, and the intentionality to keep it that way also means that we're not acknowledging that collateral or asking people to put up so much is actually part of the problem. And so how can they carry that burden risk? And so again, some of it is like looking at really low to zero, no interest, pure eyes and MRIs. And the other is packaging those investments with long-term grants that allows us to build not only our infrastructure, but create ways that we can actually underwrite any challenges and issues our network is going to have in trying to pay things back, and or be in a position where they're not choosing between food, health, and safety, and a monthly payment. So that's just some of the ways that we see right relationship around the risk, as an example of how we structure our products, but also how we approach partnership.
Yeah, this is a really important question on risk. I think it's a matter of taking a step back and questioning assumptions about what are these, I think what are these loan documents and terms that we all take for granted. And I think in my experience, we've had a number of really aligned foundation funders coming to the table, wanting to work with us, wanting to really put down the way Katali, the way that Katali, came to us and said, let's partner. And then to, months into the process, receive 50-page loan documents that are doing the opposite of what we've discussed. And I think that's not a matter of ill will. That's not a matter of deception. I think it's a matter of, these are the systems that we've been handed. These are the processes and documents that that we as financial professionals have learned, and within this extractive financial system. And so it's a matter of questioning the assumptions and trying to create new systems at every level, and not just in these conversations where we say we want to do this, and we talk to program officers and we are in alignment, and then we get handed off to lawyers, and then that's where we see the devil's in the details and this fine print around all of the risks that the borrower is expected to take on. Everything from, and if you're familiar with these documents, you know what I'm describing, but everything from collateral requirements to financial covenants that can actually make it difficult to take on other kinds of financing, that make it difficult to just do the business of the work that we're trying to do in the world, and that even in their I think in their most extractive, have requirements around general recourse or property collateral that would essentially bankrupt our organization and bankrupt all the work that we've been doing to move wealth back into the hands of community members. And so I think it's questioning the assumptions of like, why do those covenants exist? Why do we need to, why are we starting from a place of negotiating down these requirements and covenants that are pretty standard, right? The lawyers, we talk at length with these lawyers, and they say, well, this is standard, and this is the way it is. To really questioning, like, why are those assumptions there? We know that these assumptions put the burden of risk on our community organization, right, which represents, for EB-Prec, we represent nearly 1,000 community owners through a multi-stakeholder model, all of whom have a real stake in seeing this project succeed and in actually benefiting from the community, the collective wealth that we're trying to create and give back to majority BIPOC long-term East Oakland residents. And historically, we know that these are the same people from whom their houses have been razed or displaced as a result of eminent domain, right in West Oakland on the 7th Street corridor, that have had history of reverse mortgages where their homes were taken from them as a result of a predatory system that privileges the financial institutions. And so I think really just stepping back and looking at all of the aspects of the process of lending and investing, into the nitty-gritty of these documents that really do not serve communities, and that really put the burden of risk onto community members, onto these organizations that really don't have the ability to hold that risk, and for whom that risk of potential bankruptcy would be detrimental. And then asking the question as well to the funders, what is at risk for the foundation if this project fails? What is at risk for the foundation if payments are not made on time, or if payments need to be renegotiated? What is actually at risk? And I think actually looking and comparing who, if that risk falls on the borrower, what's at stake, versus if that risk falls on, if that financial fallout happens to the foundation funder. And so I think those are really important questions to consider when we're thinking about rethinking about risk.
Yeah, thank you so much, Annie. And I'll just add, I know we have some questions in the queue, but If you download the IPS, we actually have a whole appendix where we start to redefine risk and look at it on a spectrum from traditional understandings of risk that are extractive, moving along a spectrum to the JTIC fund understanding of risk being restorative. And so just all of those things that Annie named, from, you know, where decision-making power sits to the fact that BIPOC and working class communities are viewed as high risk based on structural inequities and missing information and racial and class biases, to there being all financial risk transferred to the borrower, priority positions given to the investors, collateralized loans that protect the investors' assets, loan loss reserves, guarantees, punitive measures for borrowers, all of those things that are wrapped up often in these legal documents. We are looking at those and offering a different understanding and a different way to do that. So with the JTIC fund, all financial risk is on the investor. It is on the wealth holder. They assume first loss. These loans are uncollateralized in order to protect community assets. There are no loan loss reserves or guarantees. We have written in our term sheets reparative measures for borrower and investor should a conflict arise. And then we are also working on things like standardized applications, reporting, and also even shared due diligence to take off some of the burden that falls onto the borrower as well, and have a much higher threshold for experimentation. And again, like all future governance, social, ecological, and financial risks that put all people at risk ultimately are centered in this as opposed to just looking at a financial return.
That's amazing. And internally at Justice Funders, along with that work, we're also developing a glossary of terms, specifically around questioning what these terms we inherited mean or could mean. So in that vein, I'm curious to hear from the three of you, how are you defining return on investment?
Right, Annie. I feel like we can go back and forth.
All right. I'm happy to start then. Yeah, I mean, I think we think about return on investment in a variety of ways. We have, you know, as I mentioned, we have this unique direct public offering. So we have a community of 400 investor owners who purchase equity in our cooperative. And it's a different kind of equity than, you know, what you might purchase in a Wall Street stock portfolio. It's equity that supports our community control, community ownership real estate model. And so it's patient capital, it's a minimum 5-year term, and then it's a modest dividend of 1.5% annual return that we have now returned for the past 2 years since we started our offering, and we intend to continue to return. And that's a modest return that allows people to know, okay, this is not a 0%, you know, gift or grant. This is an investment, and I'm kind of putting my stake in the ground in terms of supporting this vision. And we have investors that range from small retail investors who are community members, who are also part of our community governing body, and who are longtime East Bay residents. And as I mentioned earlier, who might have that money in a savings account at a credit union or at a bank and decide, okay, I'm going to move this portion of my savings into this community controlled real estate fund because I really support the vision of this organization and I want to see real estate taken off the speculative market and moved into community control. And so we have investors in the 1,000, I would say up to like 20 or even 50,000 range in that category, who are like longtime East Bay residents who really care about the work we're doing. Some of whom are, you know, have you know, more greater resources, but are maybe middle class, upper class, and then to our like grassroots community members who have like 1,000 and that's all they have. We even have payment plans for folks that can't afford that 1,000 up front, so they can pay it off over the course of the 5 years. And so our return on investment is 1.5% for our investors. But then we also think about other kinds of return on investment. And so the biggest that I can think of is really these investments and the funds that we bring in, the return is that we purchase land and property, take it out of the hands of these speculative investors and slumlords who are literally causing damage to the lives of our long-term residents here in Oakland, and allow for real stewardship and ownership of these properties. And so I think that would be the biggest return on investment, is just like seeing that we've actually been able to now liberate coming up on 6 properties, right, with, you know, a total valuation on those properties around $10 million. And growing, to be able to continue to offer that kind of ownership and stewardship possibility to more people, and to also show a proof of concept around what's possible if we expand our imaginations. And so I think that's the biggest one. And then there's all these social benefits around people's lives being freed up without the burden of rent, and also time and space for them to like really just breathe a sigh of relief and relax into knowing that their housing is not going to be in jeopardy. So I think the permanent affordability and the permanence of our model allows for real like mental health benefits, emotional health benefits, and physical health benefits as well of all of the residents that we house. Just to know that this is a permanent place now, and there's not going to be a fight or a battle every year when rents go up, or when a potential displacement event is going to happen, an eviction event is going to happen, which is a common occurrence here, even for longtime renters, especially for longtime renters with landlords who are really negligent and are looking to make as much profit as possible off of the speculative nature of the East Bay real estate market. So those are some of the those are some of the ways that we measure return. And I think sky's the limit. There's so many ways that we can think about return beyond the financial. And that's where we're trying to push the conversation and push the boundaries of our own imaginations. So I'll pass it to you, Vanessa.
Thanks, Annie. I feel like I gotta reach out to you. I have some questions that I'm really loving your answer to, so that'll be a different conversation. But you know, I think our return on investment is about the fact that Indigenous people in the United States, you know, current land worth is 23 trillion. And we can't utilize that as collateral. And so oftentimes for us, when we think about providing meaningful, patient, and equitable capital to Indigenous women founders and leaders in their communities who we know will spend that money supporting what they're building, but ultimately will ensure good health, good education, land stewardship. They're going to build where they're from. They're going to hire the people in their communities. And then collectively, they're going to ensure that our ceremonies, our culture, and our language is going to be held forward. And so for us, the return on the investment isn't actually about the money. We know our women are going to pay it back, so we'll be able to pay you back. But what we're hoping to have the conversation on is the return on the investment is that we ensure that people, culture, and place are valued, and that the institutional wisdom and knowledge that we hold stays, not only for our children, but truly for our children's children's children. And that we also believe the return on the investment is when we put the money into the hands of Indigenous women, they will steward and work with that money to ensure all living beings are cared for. And it can come in a variety of ways. And so the return really has to be a long-term, multi-generational investing. And that's the investment we're excited about and interested in. The short-term, sort of more transactional percentage of return, we aren't that worried about. We've never been worried about whether or not our community can like pay something back, or that they're actually not going to participate in the system. Rather, what we know is that they haven't even been given an opportunity to participate. And so for us, it's like, let us create the conditions and opportunities so that we can get you the financial returns you're seeking. But at the same time, we create the care and the space to allow for some healing for communities that are invested in, founders that are invested in, to build a different relationship with capital. So that then into the future, we are no longer at this contentious relationship we have today with money, capital, wealth, and power. And so the definition is tactical, but ultimately, if we're really talking about reparations and we're talking about repair and just transition, and like what a future looks like, the return on investment has to start with like, what are we ensuring we're leaving for the future?
Thank you. And I'll just add, for the JTAC fund, we are measuring social, ecological, and learning returns from borrowers, and also learning returns from our investors, from the foundations that we'll be reporting out of. And you can read more about that in the IPS. But I do want to speak to financial returns as well, because we have also defined those in the IPS as being on a spectrum. You know, you have the 100% loss of a grant, and then you have a 0% non-extractive, loan where you're going to preserve your capital. But what we often don't think of is that there's a spectrum therein. And so we've also widened it, and we have some of our foundations investors that are interested in aligning somewhere along that spectrum of saying, I may only need 50% of my capital back because I am quantifying the learning and social and ecological returns I'm getting as well. And those are just as important. So I just wanted to note that too, that even when thinking about non-extractive finance, there is a spectrum of financial return as well.
Wow, thank you all. With in the next 3 minutes, I'd like to address the questions in the Q&A. So the first one from George Q for EB Prec specifically: are there any penalties for withdrawing $1,000 investments before the 5-year minimum term?
Yeah, great question. We don't have a hard and fast rule around penalty fees and penalties. We have provision in our bylaws that stipulates that if there are financial reasons why an investor needs to remove that or return that money sooner than the 5-year term, that we can work with them and that we can find a solution. And so we highly encourage all investors to be prepared to move their money in a long-term way for the 5-year term. But we have some flexibility, and it's really the discretion of our board of directors to make decisions about returning investments. But every investor has requested their return funds back before the 5-year term has been granted. I think it's been about 5 or 6 at this point in the course of our 3 years since we launched our offering. And so just to give you a sense, but we definitely have flexibility there. And if you read our bylaws and our offering circular, you'll see that there's a lot of creativity and flexibility built into our model, and we're trying to make the work that we're doing and the investment terms as accessible to community members as possible. Our bylaws are actually cartoons. So I could actually send a link over the chat, but they're actually really fun to explore and to they're actually entertaining. So it's not like a boring bylaws document that you're going to see in your everyday company that you might invest in.
And that's the shift we also want to see in philanthropy and the finance world, is bring more comics to this work. Exactly. And then one final question I believe Vanessa answered in the chat, but I'm going to reiterate here, is do any of you provide capital or capacity building support for investees to grapple with understanding and identifying social return and developing the revenue streams necessary to repay loans? Does anybody else want to provide any other additional thoughts there?
I mean, part of it and why we've created this ecosystem is because, again, outside of our ecosystem is the traditional capital process, which has been historically and continues to be very harmful. So in our ecosystem, we have multiple activities happening, and the capacity building piece is is like so critical, because we have our convening and our community table building, which is where we have our summits, our virtual programming, our networking opportunities. And then we have sorry, I'm forgetting all of our stuff. There's community table building. There's the circle support is our technical assistance. And that's where every person who gets resources from us activates an entire network of classes, incubators, accelerators, etc. And then everyone that gets direct funding as well gets access to a consultant pool. And in that pool is a curated list of groups and individuals that can provide them a variety of like services at the professional level. And in all of that, each person is provided a coach and a mentor. And so we come around it in a way that when we say wraparound support, we really mean it. We really mean that we create the spaces and the conditions so that they can build networks and relationships, so that they can work with professionals to figure out what is the thing they're trying to solve. They put together a repayment plan and strategy. And then the last piece we offer is opportunities for them to just volunteer back into the ecosystem, in which case when they do that, we can actually activate forgiveness on their loans. We provide them ways to actually reduce their payments and or forgive a certain percentage if they're willing to lead a class, provide their expertise to a cohort, donate hours to one of our events. And all of that is the continuation that when we can create an ecosystem that's pushing all the levers, we can actually come around these entrepreneurs so that when they move out of our ecosystem, they're supported, they're cared for, and they have a network to constantly reach into. So when they go and try to get another investment, they come right back to us and they say, hey, look at the terms. Is this a good deal? Am I asking the right things? What do I need to be negotiating on? Now this ecosystem can support them in that way. So that is what we've created, and underneath it is an entire data collection and Indigenous evaluation framework that we are building out. That is actually represented some of the questions in what we've created here, as well as like how do Indigenous people measure wealth. And I think that's going to be the kind of field building work that we hope we can share in the next year or so around what this looks like when you actually dream beyond what we're currently living in.
Beautiful. Thank you, Vanessa. And we are almost at the end here. So I'd love for all of us to have one last word, closing remarks to the audience here today, and then I will hand it off to Sherilyn. So with that, I can kickstart this section, and just for all of you out there, really work with those you're already in relationships with, and ask them what other resources they need to support their efforts. And also look internally. Do your investments align with your values? Where else can you start experimenting? It doesn't matter how small, as long as you start somewhere. And if you do need help, Justice Funders is here for that as well, to support you in that journey. So don't be afraid to ask questions, lean into curiosity, and experiment. Lora.
Thanks, Abdiel. I just wanted to share, I'm an artist myself, and I used to separate my art and my writing from my work in philanthropy until I realized that financial activism is part of my art. The financial systems we live under, the rules and regulations and policies that govern our lives under a capitalist system and within our own philanthropic institutions are made up. They're created, and we need to recreate and reimagine them. Our IPS is an open source learning tool, so we ask that you take this back to your foundations, your investment committees, and start to reimagine what your foundation's investment policies could look like. And if what we're doing resonates with you, we invite you to be in further relationship and community with us. And I'll pass it to Vanessa. Thank you.
I don't know if I have more to add. I feel like I've said what I needed to say. What I think the only thing is, I really encourage folks to not have to spend more time wondering how to do this. I think the offering we provided with this fund, the report, and the IPS should be where you can start from. And I don't want us to delay or dally any longer. Let's build from this point forward. And continue to build the understanding in the field and the learning, but this is ready. We're ready to go.
Yeah, I don't think I could say it better myself than what everyone has shared. Just very simply, listen, learn, take action. You can do this. Join us. Yeah, we really need your support. Community-led funds, building arts and culture back into the ecosystem of businesses and communities and land and housing, and taking back stewardship and ownership of land and lives really needs your support. And there are so many ways to get involved. We'd love to be in relationship with you to figure out all the ways to do that.
Thank you all. This was wonderful. Thank you for this time. And for you, the audience, thank you so much for joining us. I will hand it off to Sherilyn to close this up.
All right. Can you all hear me? I hope you can hear me. Okay. Well, that was fantastic. So thank you all so much for your presentations. That was great. Abdiel, Annie, Lora, Vanessa. I think you gave folks a lot to think about. I'm really glad that the session's been recorded so folks can circle back and review some of the things that you all shared. I was particular the light bulbs and all that started going off when I started hearing about loans, because I think that's something that we can all kind of like, not all, but a lot of people can kind of connect with, just kind of thinking about like at the end of the day, what are some of the things that are going through your mind. So, but I just thought this was fantastic. And thank you everyone else who joined us and who stayed on. I know some folks had to drop off a little bit early, but we're glad for folks who were able to stay on for the full time. And our next summer series session will be on October 18th. So we look forward to seeing you there. And just a big thank you once again to all of our presenters and to our Looking Glass team for everything. Thanks, everyone.
Well done, everyone. Annie, I see you're still with us. Well done.
Yay!
Thank you.
I like.
Thank you. I didn't know if we should stay on, but thank you for organizing this and all the work that went into it.
You are great. Thank you so much. We loved listening to you,
great.
and enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, take good care. Thank you.
You too. Take care. Bye. Hey, Noga. Hey, Sherilyn.
How's everyone doing?
Oh, let me stop the recording.
Hi, good.